Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at what it looks like to ingest some data through Ascend's new Kafka read connectors. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and click on these new read connectors. We do have an existing Kafka connected on Azure, but for the moment, just so y'all can see the setup, I'm going to do it from scratch here. So we'll create a brand new connection to Kafka. First thing, we just need to name it so that we have a reference as to what this connection is. Let's just say my Kafka connection. Next up, we need to provide an identifier to uniquely reference what cluster this is. This is so that we have a place to handle the storage of the data that's coming from Kafka, even though the Bootstrap servers might change, for example, in node rotation or things like this. So in this case, we can choose something like um, Ascend Kafka development environment. Next up, we need to provide the Bootstrap servers as to where we're connecting to. In this case, I've got a Kafka running up on Azure, so we'll go ahead and pass in the domain name there. The next two configurations are optional, where we can provide a consumer group ID, where we can select the specific string that Ascend uses to commit offsets with. We can also leave it blank to just have Ascend generate its own consumer group ID. And the second one is consumer configs. And here's where you can pass in any other configs that you need to pass into the Kafka consumer client. It is done in normal Kafka property syntax style. And so in this case, my cluster happens to be behind a SASL configuration. And so we'll include some SASL config options here. Because this applies to the connection, any number of topics that we subscribe from will all use the same uh, overrides. So in this case, I've got a couple SASL options here. As I mentioned, because the cluster is behind SASL, we also do need a security credential for this as well. In this case, I'll go ahead and use the credential that we've set up before. Now that we've passed in all these details, we can use this test connection to make sure and see if we can successfully reach the Kafka cluster. This happens to be a Kafka cluster that's available more publicly, but we can also connect to any Kafka clusters that are in private VPCs and so on and so forth. After doing this, we can go ahead and create and use this connection so that we have it. And up next, we can build what's called an Ascend read connector, which is one particular data set that we want to use in Ascend to then build our transforms off of. So in this case, we can just say my sample data here that we're going to subscribe to. Ascend then lets us browse. And so in this case, when we're browsing, we can see all the different topics that we have. So in this case, I've got one called Avro and one called Test Hub. Let's go ahead and pick this Test Hub one, where we do have the choice of whether we want a single topic subscription or a multi-topic subscription. In this case, a single topic subscription for Test Hub 2 will be sufficient. So we can go ahead and confirm that, and we get some options here for the key and value deserializer, as you might expect with Kafka. In this case, we'll choose string for both. And you do have the option to override the consumer configs for this particular topic as well. So for example, if you know that this particular topic needs longer session timeouts or something like this, you can pass in key value properties here that will override the connection one as well. Next up, we need the schema of what's this. And the way we read in schemas for Kafka is the way that Spark does it, where you will always have one static top-level schema, which includes the Kafka offset, partition, topic, as well as the key and value. And so it gives you an envelope schema that allows you to then parse to the correct schema below it. And so we can see all of those fields here. And we can then further whatever the value might be, if it's string or we need to then JSON parse it, or maybe we need to use a schema registry service or whatnot. That can all be done in the transform after this read connector. So in this case, we can see some preview records that are coming through across my test hub 2 topic, and across a couple different partitions with a couple different values. In this case, the messages don't have keys. What we can do is we can queue up a refresh schedule, and this is essentially how often to refresh and get new data from Kafka. What Ascend will do is it'll grab all the new data that it hasn't seen previously and go ahead and persist it on your behalf. So we'll take a look at that in a little bit further, but for right now, we'll just do a never refresh. Ascend will start as soon as we create, start by going and committing to the latest offsets from that message. If need be, we can configure it to pull from earliest offsets. So once we see this done, we should expect essentially no records. After that, what we can do is send through some additional records so that we can see how that persistence changes. So in this case, because we don't have any records yet, we're seeing zero records and zero partitions. I'll go ahead and send a couple records in now to Kafka. And now what we can do, because we queued this up on a manual refresh, is we can go ahead and queue up one manual refresh. What Ascend will do is create one new partition of all the new records that are found. In this case, I've piped in a couple new records. So as soon as we click refresh, Ascend will start that process of finding all the new records, grabbing them, storing them in blob store so that we have that for perpetuity, and creating a partition out of that data set. Great. Now we can see that our records have been ingested with the couple new records that I've added. If we take a look at the partitions, we can see that behind the scenes, Ascend went ahead and created a new file that stores these records. This way, in the future, whenever we keep refreshing and pulling in new records from Kafka, we'll have a new file and a new partition of data. At this point, we've got our data ingested. We're free to start transforming in Ascend and get this data to where we want it to go. Thanks.